put a project of this caliber together in just over 2 hours is near impossible. However, there's a few things that you have to pull from in order to be able to do this successfully. So today I want to walk you through this example project in real time and show you exactly what I did, why I did it, how I could have improved it if I had more time, and the purposes of each and every step. So as you can see in front of us right now, we have basic 2D massing plans, basically to break out the zones to showcase where things need to be and how the general layout is going to look. Now, in my mind, I already knew what the elevations would look like for this design. I had no idea what the floor plans were going to look like, but I kind of had a general understanding because I'd done a project like this previously in the past. In this scenario, I find it the most useful to always have furniture available to you early on. Furniture gives us a good understanding of scale, space, and flow. So by placing the correct sized furniture, even if it's relatively generic as it is in this case and things aren't perfectly to scale at all, it is going to be very, very critical to help you and understand and map out everything as you move through it rapidly. Now, as you can see, the dining table and the living area is comprised of very generic objects and very generic shapes, but they're generally the size most people would have in their homes. Similar to that of the powder room, it is a very small generic powder room, a simple toilet and a simple hand basin. There's nothing to it. There's no real thought within 2 hours. It is the very first time anything is coming to life. So we really have to put the time and effort in at the start to get it together, and then we can refine and design better. These stairs, for example, between each volume and body could have probably been thought out a little bit better. 2 stairs in a smaller house is probably a bit of an overkill, and at the same time, it breaks up those volumes to make it a little bit claustrophobic so we don't have the connection between the kitchen and the living. Therefore, the staircase on the left, for example, could have been a single open riser staircase. Potentially, we wouldn't have needed the one on the right-hand side. It could have been storage, it could have been something else. So if this was to be developed further, maybe those stairs could be reevaluated. Nonetheless, the kitchen in itself, walking through the garage, 2 double garages, 4 cars total, generally potentially an overkill for the size of this house, but one could have been a workshop. Nevertheless, I was really just trying to get the overall look and feel working with these 3 gables and these 3 bodies. Now, as I was putting this together, I obviously had to think about what it would look like in 3D as well. So that's why I went back and cut out these walls and then put openings in them, because I didn't want to see a large gap from floor to ceiling. I wanted to see a continuation as much as possible, so that when we came up to the first floor, we could see these grand volumes. And as this design develops, you'll see what my own mind was thinking of when we go into 3D and explore this further. But for now, we have to move on to the main sleeping quarters. The sleeping quarters are upstairs are relatively simple. There's not much going on upstairs at all. It's a couple bedrooms and a bathroom. There is of course a powder room as well, because as you'll see, the introduction of a small billiards table, which could also be a sitting area, it could be an informal lounging area, it could be an office, it could be anything that you wanted it to be. Just a billiard table seemed to fit perfectly. Now, the bedrooms, obviously in a nicer home, have to be a little bit larger, have to be a little bit more spacious. They want to have walk-in robes, they want to have nicer amenities. So these things are thought about carefully. Even in this scenario where the bathroom was relatively generic in shape, it wasn't exposed to too much natural sunlight, there was no projections or protrusions in the elevation itself, had to be something a little bit different. So concealing the bathtub inside the shower and containing that whole space ensures that all of that wet area is contained in one space. So if you're bathing the kids, for example, you can contain them in the shower area rather than getting all the water all over the bathroom. With the final bedroom at the bottom, you'll see I went through multiple revisions even in a short period of time because it just wasn't working. There wasn't enough space, and yes, I could have made the house bigger, yes, I could have expanded it, but I was trying to get this done as quickly as possible. So rearranging the area in itself to be able to better create the space is more ideal than increasing the size. More often than not, when you've got your shapes and your sizes correct, you're able to actually orientate multiple patterns in different configurations to end up with the perfect layout that you need. Now, the best thing about this design is the kids' bedrooms or the guest bedrooms and the master suite are completely separate. They're separated by the middle volume, which has a double void, but at the same time, you're within close proximity, just one bridge away. So there would be complete and utter privacy in this master suite. Now, like I said, I already had an idea of what I wanted this to look like at the start, and to be fully transparent, it is a complete ripoff. To be able to do something in 2 hours without redesigning everything, you're going to have to pull inspiration left, right, and center. You're not going to be able to do anything 100% unique, 100% original, which is half the point of this video. You need a significant amount of time to be able to do things right. Yes, in 2 hours, you can get an exceptional render complete. Yes, in 2 hours, you can get a generic floor plan on a piece of paper so that you can start talking about the design. But in no way, shape, or form would this be an original design. There is so much more that needs to go in to this project to be able to actually tweak it, correct it, and make it work properly. Nonetheless, the architecture in itself is still absolutely stunning and is absolutely beautiful at the end of the day. A triple volume with a triple gable with recessed stonework in between will always look stunning. And in a simple black and white color combination, it will always look timeless. Now, if you haven't noticed already, black and white is generally my color scheme. I like to stick to the neutral color tones as much as I can. That way, in 10 years time, in 20 years time, hopefully I'll look back, the clients will look back, and everybody will look back and go, that is still a very timeless design and we're still very happy with it. Whereas when you're doing pinks and greens and blues and crazy experimental things, it's going to be very dated very quickly. So for me personally, I just like to stay to the more timeless side of architecture where possible. Now, when you're dealing with imaginary elements and imaginary timeframes and imaginary budgets, you can do whatever you like and you don't have to worry about the structure. You can just drag and drop masses, you can drag and drop glass balustrades in without having to worry about fixing details or channels for the frame of the glass, or absolutely anything. You can just go ahead, mass model it, and it'll look awesome. But in reality, you'd have to detail that for several hours before anybody could even look at it and not laugh at it. But luckily, this is just for YouTube. This is just an example of what can be successfully achieved in 2 hours after being in the field for over a decade. Now, because we are moving into 3D, we want to make sure that everything works properly. We want to make sure our textures and our materials are aligned. We want to make sure that each element is cutting properly, it is not overlapping, and we're not going to have any ugly glitching effects when we move to our rendering software. And because renders only look good when everything is complete, we have to go ahead and create some sort of landscaping feature. Now, landscaping isn't my specialty, it's not my forte. There is many skilled people that I work with to be able to do landscaping. That's why I've stuck to a very simple landscaping layout. 2 zones on either side and an incredible cantilevered lap pool down the middle. Now, the reason for this lap pool is the design ideology was on a sloping site. It was basically the sheer cliff after the flat level landing for the house. And what way to feel more alive than swimming down your massive lap pool with a nice glass edge and seeing the natural world escape below you and fall away. That was the vision I had, at least in my head, and it slowly starts to come together, as you can see here. Now, to be able to do a pool like this, it's not going to be able to be done in a fiberglass shell. It is going to have to be custom made. It's going to have to be concrete, and it's going to have to be specifically engineered, tying back into the house, tying back in underground, and basically cantilevering out as much as it can. Obviously, we'd be able to get a cantilever of 6 meters, 9 meters, whatever we'd like, with enough concrete and enough backspan. But at the same time, we want to make it look realistic. So there's a few elements I'll add later down the track just to make sure this pool looks like it could work regardless of the scenario, regardless of the country. Now, from the very first scenario, I had an idea of what this pool would look like, and I didn't really opt and change it much. I did attempt to introduce an infinity edge, but then I went with the -0 lot edge that didn't need an overflow because it was just grassland underneath. If we didn't do it right, that grass would all burn and die, unless it was obviously fresh water, but that's semantics, we could deal with that at a later stage. Once we moved into twinmotion, I wanted to use a generic background to show some sort of massing as well. I would have loved for twinmotion to import terrains and to be able to introduce these 3D white blocks in the slope as well, but unfortunately that isn't available in twinmotion at the moment, so we're just going to have to stick to some very, very generic flat boxes and hope for the best. The reason I like to do renders in tandem with designing is because it allows you to think outside the box. You're no longer thinking in 2D and you're no longer thinking in the floor plan. You're actually thinking about the users, the experience, you're thinking about how it will look throughout the day, you're thinking about the sky, the sun, and the shadows. And by taking it into a rendering software, be it twinmotion, be it Enscape, be it anything in between, you can actually switch your brain over from one form of thinking to a completely different form of thinking. Once you're in twinmotion, once you're in your rendering software, then you can start to think about those little gritty details. Like for example, the stonework in between these volumes. Does the stone need to be a light color? Does it need to be a warmer color? Does it need to be black? Does it need to be charred timber? What does that stone really need to be to ensure that this architecture is working well in its environment? Now, I spent a little bit of time playing with it and I still couldn't get the stone absolutely right, unfortunately, but we'll come back to that later on. Because I wanted the main volume in the middle to be strikingly different from the two on the side, I also introduced a different form of cladding internally. So white plaster on both the left and right, and then a dark charred timber in the middle. Now that dark charred timber, it could be warm timber, it could be anything in between, but at this stage it was charred timber. I believe I changed it a little bit later on back to a nice warmer timber. We come back to the pool for that glass edge. I didn't model the glass edge at the start, and I didn't model the structural support below. But now, as you can see, besides twinmotion crashing on us multiple times throughout this project, we have that beautiful glass edge. We have the cantilevering, free-flowing swimming pool. Now, this swimming pool is 20 meters long in this design, which is a very good sized lap pool. Anybody that is a good swimmer would be able to swim this easily. Me, on the other hand, I would struggle to swim this 20 meters and it would take me forever. But hey, the lap pool isn't specifically for me, so that's okay. When introducing pools and water into a render, it's critical that we spend a little bit of time on them, because the reflection of the water and the color of the water can change the entire tone of the render and the scene itself. In this scenario, because there was not much of context, there was no houses modeled beside, I decided to hedge the entire property. That way I could screen as much of the property as I could from the neighbors, and I could pretend like that was the boundary. Even though there was no physical fences created, there was nothing on these sides, I could just go ahead, drag and drop in some hedges, and that way from the renders, it looked completed, it looked thought about. Again, 2 hours is not enough time to be able to do a lot of things in detail. And the worst thing is, twinmotion crashed on me twice whilst creating this hedge, so I had to repeat the same steps multiple times and I was not really pleased about it. One thing that you should take into consideration and think about when you're modeling in twinmotion is your grass. Make sure you do that at the very end of the project. That way it uses the least amount of power whilst you're moving around and rendering and editing. Where it's possible, we also want to use the most realistic textures we can. That way we can continue to think about how those textures will intersect, how they will genuinely look on site. Does that travertine need to be a tiled finish? Can it be a solid slab? Probably could be a solid slab, but it would cost an absolute fortune. So maybe we should have done it in slabs, maybe we should have done it in tile format, and we would have known straight away what it would look like at the end of the project. Similar to the vegetation and the natural landscaping, when we paint in the vegetation, we know immediately what it would look like if this environment was overgrown, if the owners decided not to maintain it, or if the owners decided just that they didn't care anymore. Well, it would look still pretty cool, but it probably wouldn't be the most ideal backyard as envisioned. So an overgrown, dilapidated backyard that is slowly dying and withering away may provide an interesting render, but it also provides a different context of what that building could be and what that building should be. So that's why eventually I decided to take out all of the additional bushes and shrubs around the pool, taking away the wilderness feel and really bring it back to a manicured landscape. Now, of course, there is no surrounding buildings, like I said before, so introducing more realistic trees, high poly trees from Globe Plants allows us to shield and screen away all of these buildings. If you're looking at them directly, yes, you'll notice they're big white boxes. But if you're glancing at the image, you won't realize that the surrounding buildings are fake and that they're just dropped in. You'll see something in the background and think the render is completely completed. One thing to take note is Macs are still not able to path trace. Therefore, spending a lot of time on the glass, textures and materials is critical to making any render look half decent, even in a short period of time. The fact that there's no path tracing means that there isn't high details in the reflections and the shadows. It just doesn't look as ultra realistic as I'd like it to. Nonetheless, with the M1 Ultra and the Mac Studio, it still does produce a good quality render at the end of the day, but it could be better. So if you're on a Windows machine, you might be able to do this to a much higher degree and a much higher caliber. So what I'll do is I'll export this 3D model as an FBX. I'll add it. So what I'll do is I'll export this model as an FBX. I'll save it to the Dropbox. So anybody that is subscribed to the Patreon membership, there's a link down in the description below, will be able to download it and take it for a spin on their machine. Now, like I say in every video and every rendering exercise, We've done the work, we've done the hard yards. So why are we rendering out just that one amazing critical image? Why aren't we rendering out 14, 15, 16, 18, or even 100 images depending on how good the model is? We can go around, change scenes, change camera angles, change depth of field, change the perception, change the time of day, anything you would like to be able to export multiple images of the same project. Now, yes, some people may get bored of seeing the same project. However, at the same time, it is important that we're showcasing more of our work more on social media and branding it wherever we can. So you'll see it was quite challenging for me to get multiple images out of this project because there wasn't much going on. Realistically, it was the one elevation that was completed and it was the swimming pool and the landscaping. It wasn't like I had the ability to go through the inside, the outside, the front yard, the backyard to be able to generate multiple images for this project. So even though I was struggling, at the end of the day, I still managed to get a solid 14 social media images out ready to go. And obviously, whilst I was creating all these images, I started to think about the spaces more. I started to think about the finer details. The LED strip light, which is one of my signatures, I forgot to add in at the very early stage of the design. So I introduced the LED strip light into that central gable. The fire pit area on the left-hand side was just a grand volume of space. There was nothing going on. But when you think it through, when you actually consider how it might be used by people throughout the day, then you can start actually introducing the physical objects, which also improve the render at the end of the day. Now, twinmotion in 2 hours is very limited. You're limited to what is available to you on Sketchfab rather than hunting down for the best products available. I would have loved to go through, find some amazing 3D objects from manufacturers all around the world and introduce them into this render, especially this fire pit, which was very, very low quality. And even though people are relatively basic and relatively generic on twinmotion, it's still good to add them into renders for a very clear understanding of scale and space. By introducing humans and children at the same time, we immediately can gravitate to how tall that person is, how small that child is, and go, wow, that house is huge, or that volume is a little bit small. Maybe I need to increase it. Maybe I need to do this, maybe I need to do that. But until we see it through our own eyes or the perception of our own eyes, we'll never really be able to know what it looks like. The floating ducky, on the other hand, is just a little bit of rendering fun. If you ever see objects like this in a render, it's most likely because the rendering artist was sitting there going, I'm a little bit over it, I need to introduce some fun, and I want to make it mine. So the yellow rubber ducky is just a little bit of personality, a little bit of fun into what is otherwise a very manicured design. Towards the end, twinmotion started to play up even more. It wasn't allowing me to download some of the objects that I wanted, and I wasn't able to find a nice outdoor dining table setting to go on the right hand side of this design. So what I had to end up settling for was a couple yoga mats and no people, because any people I could find doing yoga were just a little bit too creepy and a little bit too weird. So I opted for just plain yoga mats on the travertine tiles. Once you have all of your images set up and ready to go, the last thing you need to do is export your videos. Now, the videos can be used as a generic show on social media, or they can be used for fly-throughs, walkthroughs, whatever you need. But again, you've done the work. You might as well spend those last few minutes and bring this project fully to life.